In my previous video, I talked about how the Frankfurt School influenced the intellectual and cultural environment of the West. And I also talked about the Fabian Society. There was another organization that appeared during roughly the same period, the Club of Rome. The Club of Rome was created in 1968. However, there is no direct evidence that connects the Frankfurt School to the creation of the Club of Rome, but the timing can't be just a coincidence. During the same time period, when Frankfurt School ideas were becoming increasingly influential in Western universities and intellectual circles, you suddenly have another group of extremely influential people becoming concerned with something completely different, the future of humanity. More specifically, how many humans can the planet actually handle? In 1972, the Club of Rome published a study called The Limits to Growth, and the basic argument was pretty simple. We live on a finite planet, but a human population keeps growing. Industrial production keeps growing. Consumption keeps growing, and our use of natural resources keep growing too. So eventually, something has to give. And the problem, according to the report, wasn't simply growth, but exponential growth. Let's say something grows by 2% every year. It does not just add 2% of the original amount each year. The growth compounds over longer periods. Even the modest growth rate becomes enormous. So imagine an economy growing at roughly 3% annually. It doubles approximately every 23 years. Over a century, it becomes roughly 19 times larger. But the Earth does not become 19 times larger. The planet is not expanding with the GDP. So what happens when you put unlimited growth on a finite planet? Actually, it's an important question, but here's what is wrong with it. Once you accept the idea that humanity is consuming too much, you eventually have to start asking, well, how many humans is too many? And that's where population enters the discussion. Because if every human consumes resources, then more humans means more resources consumption, more food, more water, more energy, and all that. So if you believe that the planet has a fixed carrying capacity, then population itself becomes a problem that has to be managed. And this wasn't some random group of internet conspiracy theorists saying this. The Club of Rome consisted of the scientists, economists, politicians, industrialists, and the academics. People with serious influence, and some of the language used in their publications was pretty bad. In their 1974 report, Mankind of the Turning Point, there was a line that says the Earth has cancer and the cancer is man. Think about that for a second. The cancer is man, not inefficient technology, not pollution, the man, human beings. The words matter because how you describe a problem influences how you think about the solution. If you describe humanity as a cancer, then reducing the cancer starts sounding like a solution, right? And there is a massive difference between saying the human beings are damaging the environment and we need to fix it, and saying human beings themselves are the problem. Not just that, in 1991, the Club of Rome published another report called The First Global Revolution. And there was another passage that gets brought up a lot. It basically talks about the need for a common enemy that could unite humanity. It mentions things like pollution, global warming, water shortages, and famine. And then it says the real enemy then is humanity itself. That's not a very good way of looking at the human race. And this brings us to another Club of Rome report. In 1976, they published Reshaping the International Order. And this is where I think that things get ugly. Because now we're not just talking about population. We're talking about how the world itself should be governed. The argument was basically that many of the world's problems were too big for individual countries to solve on their own, like poverty, food, energy, resources, population, pollution, economic development, all of these cross national borders almost every day. And therefore, they argued we need greater international cooperation and new forms of international organization. International cooperation is that's not a bad thing. If countries want to cooperate on trade, cool. If the countries want to work together on environmental problems, sure. The problem starts when cooperation turns into the governance, because those are two completely different things. Countries cooperating with each other is one thing, and countries transferring actual decision making power to the institutions above the national level is something else. So, who decides? Who controls these institutions? Who decides which problems are serious enough to justify transferring authority away from individual countries? And once you transfer that authority, can you get it back? Because power has a very funny habit. Once the institutions get power, they don't want less of it. And you can see this basic principle in the European Union. The European countries voluntarily transferred significant areas of decision making to supranational institutions. If a decision is made at the level above the individual nation, who exactly is responsible? If you don't like the policy, who do you blame? Your national government, the European Commission? And if you can't easily identify who is responsible, then how do you hold them accountable? So the problem is not whether international cooperation is good or bad, but how much power should be transferred away from ordinary people and their national governments, and who controls the people who receive that power. If you believe the planet has a limited carrying capacity, then population becomes a variable. You can increase it, you can decrease it, you can try to control it. And throughout the 20th century, population control became a very serious subject among the governments, academics, and the international institutions. But here is something that I think is often overlooked. Ideas don't just stay inside the research papers, they spread. An idea starts with the academics, then politicians start talking about it, then the governments create the policies around it, then the schools teach it, the universities teach it, the journalists talk about it, the Hollywood puts it in movies, then eventually people started repeating it without even knowing where the ideas came from. And this is where I think the population crisis begins. Because today we're living through something that would have sounded absolutely insane a few decades ago. A huge part of the developed world is experiencing collapsing birth rates. Countries that once worried about having too many people are now worried about having too few, like Japan, South Korea, Italy, Spain, Germany. Most of these developed countries are facing population crisis. And the worst part is that nobody had to force people to stop having children. People simply started deciding that they didn't want them. And obviously, there are many reasons for this, like housing is expensive, marriage is, happening later, people are living in the cities, yada, yada, yada. But what happens when you spend decades telling people that the future is going to be terrible? Think about the message people hear constantly: the climate catastrophe, resource depletion, overpopulation, economic collapse, food shortages, water shortages, environmental destruction, a planet on the verge of collapse. And then you ask a young person, do you want to bring a child into this world? What answer do you think they're going to give? And that's what I mean when I talk about cultural consequences. You don't have to create a government policy saying that don't have children. You don't have to ban childbirth. You can simply create a worldview in which having fewer children feels like the responsible thing to do. That is much more powerful because nobody is forcing them. Now, there is another organization that I think we need to talk about here: the World Economic Forum. Because if the Club of Rome helped popularize the idea that humanity needs to operate within the planetary limits, organizations like the WF became major platforms who implemented the idea. I'm not saying that Club of Rome created the WF and the WF created the EU and they all secretly planned everything. It's just that you need institutions that share the similar assumptions and things just happen. One institution says we have planetary limits, and then another one says we need a global corporation. Then another says that national governments can't solve global problems alone, so create a one world government, so on and so on. And eventually, all of these ideas starts reinforcing each other. Nobody has to sit in one room and coordinate everything. The ideas themselves create the direction. And this is why I think the Club of Rome is worth studying. Not because they predicted everything correctly, actually, they did not, but because one can literally predict the next move of the global elites. If people believe the future is going to be better, they tend to invest in the future. They build the businesses, they build the houses, they have children, they take risks, create things. But if people believe the future is going to be, worse, they simply stop having children. They simply stop believing in the future. And actually, the more humans you have, the more potential problem solvers you have. That's the part of the population debate that often gets ignored by everybody. A human being isn't just a consumer. A human being is also a creator, a scientist, engineer, farmer, and a lot more. So maybe the question shouldn't be how many humans can the earth survive. It should be that what kind of civilization can humans build?